Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Pocket Theology. This looks different. Jason, what are we doing?
Well, we have the ever incomparable, amazing Megan Dennis.
Hello.
She's here with us, and today we're actually, so you preached this past Sunday,
I did.
and we talked a little bit about kind of what you preached on, but more importantly, we had another conversation about the importance of questions and how questions help us better understand. Yeah, it was a great time. A fun podcast. Is always great to have you here, Megan Dennis.
Thank you.
And if you ever have any questions or if this sounds interesting, want to get in touch with us, you can always email us at the email address down at the bottom.
And to the one fan watching, thank you for being there.
You know who you are.
You say this every week. They like the podcast. Enjoy.
Okay, so I'm here with the incomparable, amazing Megan Dennis. Good to have you here. It's been a while.
It's been enough time. Yes, it has been a while.
Okay, so we're trying something new. Jaden now has his own separate station over here. He normally would
Look
sit
at
over
me.
here. He's got his own thing, and
Oh.
he's switching things. I don't understand what he's doing, and it's okay. I never need to.
It's gonna make things great.
It's gonna make things great. Okay, so I was thinking about this before we were starting. Okay, you have one of the because your maiden name is Megan Watson.
Yes,
Okay, and because of that, you had the most awesome nickname.
I sure did.
Okay, what was your nickname?
Megawatts.
Megawatts. And I'm like, dude, that is the coolest nickname, and it totally makes sense because it brings both. Did you have a nickname, Jaden, growing up?
Jaybird.
Oh, I had that. Well, mine was because when I was little, I liked to run without my clothes, so I was naked as a jaybird. That was what they would. But have you never heard that? Naked as a jaybird?
No.
That's a real thing.
That is a thing.
That is
it
a real
really?
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in high school, my senior year, I got Rojo because I had red hair.
Hmm.
And did you know we almost named our son Eli Rojo?
You did?
Well, Lisa wanted to name him Rojo, and I vetoed that.
Good thing. No, Lisa. But why are just jaybirds naked?
I don't know. I don't even understand. I don't even know where the phrase. It's like one of those things that it sounds like something like someone from the South said. That guy naked as a jaybird. You know, that has no real meaning why they said it.
I'm pretty sure all animals are naked.
No, they're clothed. That's what the Bible says. Even the lilies are clothed. The lilies are clothed, not the birds. The birds have nests.
Yeah.
But they have feathers. They're not like naked. The naked mole rat, that's naked. The hairless cat, that's naked. All other animals have fur and other things to cover them.
We have hair.
But not like an animal. I mean, first of
I'm
all,
just saying we're covered in hair.
Not
just like
like-
an animal.
but not. Oh, I'm sorry. You can still see my skin. Like you ever seen what a cat looks like when you shave it? Did you know the patterns are
or a
actually,
hairless cat.
Yeah, which are weird and evil looking.
They would be naked though. They don't have
They-
hair.
yeah,
but
they are naked.
Humans do have hair.
But but it's very minimal.
I'm just saying.
like I could
if
not.
that's your argument.
Let's not put that one to the test. Let's.
Welcome to Pocket Theology.
Welcome to
everyone.
Pocket Theology, where we talk about nothing and everything. Okay, so you preached on Sunday.
I did.
So we're going through our parables series. So here's I was thinking about this. Like, okay, years ago I had a professor who said to me, "You should never preach something to somebody else that you haven't preached to yourself first." And when you were going through it, okay, so first remind us what was the parables that you taught on.
I did 3 and maybe 3.5. I'm not sure if the last one is a parable or just Jesus talking weird.
Yeah. Well, let's be clear, he does. He does that
Yeah,
regularly.
he does that. Okay, the first one was the parable of the hidden treasure.
Okay.
The second one, very similar, the pearl of great price. And then the third one was the parable of the net.
And then the fourth, the half one is the house weird
Yes.
house thing. Okay, so
Jesus
what are the-
instructing the disciples.
All right. So when you were going through them, we've been talking about, and we actually a couple weeks ago, or was it last week? We talked about curiosity, right, and the power of questions, and ironically, okay, just this shows how my brain works. That's what got me thinking about nicknames. Don't ask me why. It's the curiosity. As you were working through those, what were some of the questions that came to mind for you? Like, did one of the parables stand out to you more than another, and if so, why?
I mean, definitely the treasure and the pearl. Or
Because
the
your name means
pearl. I didn't share that in my sermon.
You didn't?
No, but you can all call me Pearl.
I didn't. Okay, so because we
I
talked
am the
about
treasure.
you are the treasure.
I am the
I am
Pearl
the
of great
treasure, the
price.
Megan of great price.
Yeah, no, yeah, those two stuck out the most just because I think they, for me, evoke the most questions. The parable of the net, I would say, is more so reassuring to
Yeah.
me. But the two of the treasure pearl, I really liked the not contrast, the you could view it one way or view it
Yeah.
another way, totally opposite views, really.
Yeah.
But I could relate and ask a lot of questions.
So what kind
in
of
both.
questions came up for you?
So more so just like the concept of what I give up is actually what reflects what my true values are.
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm willing to give up time, other things to do is what I value.
Yeah.
So for me, I think I use the example of I will spend time on social media rather than with my kids, who I say I value.
Yeah.
And I do, but there are definitely times where social media takes the upper seat,
Okay,
which can be sad.
I think anybody who's a parent will understand this, and I didn't understand it until I was a parent, and maybe other people can. I mean, you're not a parent yet, right?
No.
Are you?
Are
I'm
you?
just kidding.
Are you, Jaden? So I didn't realize how easy it is to want to be distracted from your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like that never crossed my mind. That there's like sometimes I'm just like I need a break, and or because it is like being a parent doesn't shut off. You're a parent 24/7. I mean, I remember, and maybe you've had this conversation with Jason, but I used to say, like Lisa would have to do something. Say, yeah, I'll babysit the kids. She's like, you're their dad. You don't babysit.
No.
That's called being a father. and it,
It's true.
but because I mean, in our culture we talk about that, but that is a real thing. Like that distraction of, and it's not that I don't value my kids. It's that sometimes it's really easy to go, oh my gosh, I need to be distracted. But what that shows, maybe I'm valuing something else. It's not that I'm valuing social media more than my kids.
Mm-hmm. Or it's the comfort or the my own time, the being selfish.
But so did you find, and this is a little bit different. Normally we have a whole lot of banter and stuff going on, but I'm curious because as we going into this series, the whole point of it was to ask better questions instead of just going, oh, here's the point of it is you're worth more. Did you find that made you read the parables differently?
Yeah. Or just looking at them with what questions do they evoke?
Yeah.
And then what do you do with that?
Yeah. I think, okay, so, and I think this is a topic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, is culturally, I don't know that we're being taught to ask good questions.
We're not.
Yeah. Well, okay. So
or we go to Google for literally everything.
Yeah.
We're not taught to think critically anymore.
So do you remember, okay, when I was a kid, and this is before Common Core and all that, on math, right? You do the math, and at the back of the math was the math book was the answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, and often if I didn't figure something out, I'd just go to the back, put down the answer, and that's why they wanted you to write out how you got there. But you know what they never asked me was why I felt it was important to get there. It was just, here's the right answer, which I think that isn't that the purpose. Were you in Common Core? Was that taught while you were in school?
Well, yeah, we had big books that in the back they had all the answers and stuff, but you were still graded on showing your work. Absolutely. I don't know if it was called Common Core.
Okay, then you would know if it was Common Core because it was a way they taught. But the goal of Common Core was to, I think, if I understand it, was to, why are you doing this? Like, how did you arrive? What decisions did you make to get there?
Show your work.
Yeah, but for us, it was more memorization. So in that sense, I think I get it. But culturally, it's interesting is that I feel like the questions that our culture, and we talked about this a few podcasts ago, I think the questions that we're asking aren't the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
They're often silly questions that are meant to distract from the real issues. Or I'm going to ask a question guised as a way to find out whether or not we're on the same side or not. Mm-hmm. As opposed to curiosity. From a faith perspective, okay, so
I think actually I'll add even kind of in a third aspect. I feel like sometimes we're asking questions, hoping that we can just do the lazy work of getting the answer without having to do our own self-analyzation or critical work.
Yeah, our school scored really low in inferencing skills, and for 2 years, that's like all they hit on was like use your inferencing skills, but basically filling in the blanks of what you don't know based on what you do already know.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're that great at that as
And
a culture anymore.
and I think in churches we do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that um, from a Christian perspective, this is the part of the danger. Okay, so we've been talking about apologetics a lot recently, right? And I think one of the dangers with apologetics is here's the answer to this question.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of actually, well, why are they asking that question? What are they really looking for? Because more often than not, my experience, and I'm just going to say it's my experience, maybe you've had different, but most time when I'm engaging with non-Christians, they're not actually looking for my theological treatise on their answer.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the real issue at hand. So, why would God allow suffering?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you just got that obstinate person who they're just trying to throw a wrench in to see if I can figure it out. But more often than not, I find it's because they either have suffered, they know someone who suffered, or they're looking at the world and going, this doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And again, because we're not, I think within the church we've taught, well, here are the stock answers. When all of a sudden we come to an answer we don't have, or come to a question we don't have an answer for, I think we get hosed.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I also think you have to start looking at questions as like an enrichment process. If you're just looking at questions to just receive this golden nugget of information, I don't think you're going through the process right. If you treat it like an enrichment process where it's like, nope, I need to remove the flack, all the stuff I don't know. Here's the information I do have. I need to refine it into something that's usable or even beautiful. And the beautiful part being information about God, right? Now I feel like you have a healthier mindset for questions as opposed to just wanting to receive more and more, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Would you, okay, so you went to a Catholic college.
Mm-hmm.
Did they approach, what was their approach? Or did you even have theological classes? Like, how did they approach those conversations? Because I know how we approach it as Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, and I've never been to a Catholic university or school.
It's been a while. I'm trying to think back. Honestly, they weren't like the core of my education, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Or like
so, 'cause
even
you weren't doing a
I
theological
think you
education.
had to take a religious course.
Okay.
And I think I took the New Testament and they went over the Gospels and basically the themes of the Gospels
Okay.
and who the authors were and who their audience was too,
Okay.
is what I remember.
So when I was in school, so I went to Northwestern, now University Northwestern St. Paul. Very long name. If you were doing any, whether or not you were studying for ministry, you had a bunch of core that were biblically based and theologically based. And I think that was one of the hard parts when I was in my, and I'm going to sound super arrogant now, and probably because I was, when I was in my bachelor program, it was really about the ability to recite information.
Mm.
And because I had already been in ministry for many years at that point, I had read quite a bit and was rather, I'll just be honest, rather full of myself, thought I had answers. And my professors actually acknowledged, like, yeah, I had some good basis. The problem is that what it did, I wasn't in there to learn to ask better questions. I was there to prove I was right.
Sure.
And I wonder how much of that is, I think a lot of people, that's how they see us as Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Is we're just, and I think that's how the world is. I think every group wants to prove they're right, but I think that's what Christians have become notorious for, is they're so busy being right that they miss being righteous.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so, yeah, you were going to say something.
I have found, while my Catholic college did not teach this, my best friend is Catholic and we became best friends discussing theology and going back and forth, and at least doing it with another Christian was a little less intimidating, but also I didn't feel the need to prove anything or to explain. So working out those differences was actually helpful. I don't know, you could consider it practice even maybe, but like getting a foundation of, no, what do I believe and why do I believe it? Because she believes something different. And why does she believe that? And where's the difference?
Yeah.
How did we get to these two different conclusions of what it means to take communion?
Yeah.
And going back, tracing it all the way back to wherever it needed to be traced to is helpful in anything that I now encounter or any other question that I get, to be like, it's okay if I don't know right now. I'm going to go find out and get back to you.
I wonder if people feel like they can approach the Bible that way. or if they feel like their job in reading the Bible is to find the answer. What's the answer?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that was mine. So the reason why you preached, and I appreciated you taking this weekend for me, one of my closest friends, a guy who's like my brother's name's Dan Shoemake. He's a Anglican priest.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentored him when he was in high school. He's about 10 years younger than I am, almost to the day or to the month. His birthday is like 2 weeks from now.
Are you trying to tell us your birthday is coming up?
My birthday's in July. Yeah. I'm going to be 49. I can't, that's crazy. So we met in Minnesota. So his family's up in Minnesota. So he was up there, and his mom gave him a Prius said, "Hey, you want this Prius? It's got like 120,000 miles on it, whatever." So he asked me, he's like, "Hey, I've got to drive to Texas because there's a church, an Anglican church there that closed, and they want to donate a bunch of their old stuff from their service to our church, his church plant in Georgia." So he asked if I'd be willing to go on the drive with him. So we drove the Prius down all day Thursday, and then we got a U-Haul, pulled his Prius by a U-Haul, filled up the back of this 10-foot, 12-foot U-Haul, and then drove from Texas to Georgia on Friday. A lot of driving. But one of the things that I appreciate about Daniel is we disagree on some pretty hefty theological stuff. But the amount of conversation and questions and curiosity is really fun because he has such a different perspective on things like communion.
Mm-hmm.
And even though sometimes we speak the same language, we have very different meanings behind those words.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate. He's also, and I want to have him on the podcast at some point, genuinely the smartest person I've ever met in my life. Yeah, I know. You should feel offended by that. Very offended. He is, he is genuinely, and I don't, this is not I'm not blowing smoke. He is a remarkably intelligent man.
This is going to convince him to come on the podcast.
Well, I don't need to
think
convince
so.
him. We actually were talking about we should start another podcast because this is how we approach things. No, on top of this, not apart from this, but along with this.
He's just digging himself a hole.
I love. I'm digging. But here was the conversation. Okay, so in this was, he is very educated, and I would consider myself reasonably educated in some things. But he remembers things in a way that I don't. And so we're talking about, actually it was a political conversation, always fun to talk about, safe conversations, Jesus and politics. Yeah. And he was listing off all these facts, things about, I don't remember what we were talking about, Obamacare or something like that. Actually, I think it was Obamacare. And he had facts and data. And I said, here's the thing. I understand your facts, but most people don't make decisions based on facts. They make decisions based on feelings, on how they feel about something, because that's how they interpret their facts. Well, I think this is also part of the reason when we have theological conversations, I've tried to win arguments with facts about the Bible or facts about a theological truth. Never, and I mean legitimately, I've never seen anybody come to Jesus because they're not really looking for facts. There's something at their heart level. There's something different that they're looking for. And I think that's why the Holy Spirit is so necessary in salvation, because the Holy Spirit might give you eyes to see the facts, but the Holy Spirit has to do a working in your heart. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But I wonder if part of the reason why, as Christians in our culture today, and this is why I think I wanted to do the parable series over the summer, is I don't know that we know how to ask questions even about our own faith, because I think what we want are facts. Mm-hmm. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I think part of it, I think questions or being questioned is intimidating.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I'm afraid to ask questions or I don't want to look stupid, or, well, I should really know the answer to that. I'm not going to ask that, or I don't even think to ask.
Yeah.
A question, or being raised in the church, just kind of the expectation that you should know that, and then all of a sudden you hear something explained a different way and you're like, wait what? Why did I not know that?
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. Or like if someone had asked me that question, I would have panicked.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know, or I didn't.
Well, and that's exactly it. Like this idea that if I don't know something, I legitimately believed for years that if I didn't have an answer, I was letting God down. Like God was up there going, Jason, How can you
How
not
do you
know
not know
this?
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the things that I love about when I talk with new Christians, especially older new Christians, because there's that point. I think at some point in your life, you realize I don't know things.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was my 40s. My 40s is when,
And it's okay to not know things. You get to that point in your life too.
yes.
You're like, I guess it's okay. I don't know.
Yeah, like in my 30s, I was pretty insecure about it. Dustin, because I went to school in my 30s,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I had to have answers. And then I started doing my MDiv program, and I started realizing how dumb I was. And then in my 40s, all of a sudden, I'm like, it's kind of refreshing to be dumb. It's kind of
Less
nice.
pressure.
Yeah, I mean, really. And I mean, let's think about this. Jesus, who is the perfect representation of a human being, most of the time, he just asked questions. Now, in fairness, he wasn't asking questions that he didn't know answers to because he's God,
Mhm.
right? But he regularly asked questions. And I wonder how much of that, and maybe this is an American issue, maybe other cultures, I've not been around the world to know this, but it does feel like we're so afraid of looking ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were having a conversation many years ago on staff, and someone made the comment to me, well, no one wants to look stupid. And yet, if you're not willing to be a little humiliated, I think you lose something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Nicodemus, the story of Nicodemus in John chapter 3, when he's like, how do I get, what does it mean to be saved? Well, here's a religious leader asking Jesus, like, how do I get saved? He's a religious leader. He should
Mm-hmm.
know the answer to that. And Jesus says that you have to be born of water and born of blood or spirit and water. No,
So,
water and blood.
so then do you think it's like a pride issue? Like we're not willing to humble ourselves enough to ask questions? Like or just think that we have all the right answers and unwilling to even attest to that fact?
Yeah, because I always appreciate when people, Nicodemus probably knew the answer, but maybe he was willing to hear the other side or like, well, what does this guy think it is?
Yeah.
Like, if it's okay to ask questions that we think we already know the answer to learn a different perspective.
And I bet you he probably thought he knew the answer.
Yeah.
And then Jesus says, you need to be born again. And he's like, how am I supposed to crawl back up into my mother's
Right.
womb?
Right.
Like, he must have been like, that's ludicrous, Jesus.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? And I have a feeling that he would have assumed, well, follow Torah,
Yep.
get circumcised, do these things, right? But the willingness, and this is why the story of Nicodemus is, I think, so beautiful, is he was willing to be a little humiliated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think this is the danger. I mean, I've seen this in my own life, and I'm now feeling like I'm getting a little freedom from this. I started meeting with the spiritual director, and I just had my first official session with her today. And she asked me, it was a great question. She said, what are you hoping to get out of this? I was like, ooh, a good question is really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I feel like I've done quite a bit of work on myself, but I've kind of hit a wall. I don't know how to I don't know I don't have the skill set to do the next thing. Like I've kind of maxed out my ability for self-evaluation, self-awareness. I need somebody who knows more than I do, who's willing to challenge me and push things that I don't even realize need to be pushed. And she kind of pushed on that a little. She's like, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, well, I don't even know. I don't know what I mean. I just know that there are clearly things that I don't know. And even this is my second official session, my first official, but my second time meeting with her. The first one was a kind of a discernment to figure out if this was a good fit. And she actually said, she goes, well, if you don't know what you're looking for out of this, I don't know how to help you. And I had to start asking questions of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this is again, the whole notion of the parables, of why we're looking at through the lens of not just interpreting what the parables are, because we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's clear commentary. Sometimes Jesus himself says, here's the parable. But they're meant to challenge us. Well, we have to be willing to ask questions or to acknowledge, I don't even know what questions to ask right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a deeper question, because I think most Christians are afraid to ask questions because they are pride. I think pride is one. I think fear is a big one. I don't want to look stupid.
Mm-hmm.
That was mine.
I think there's also there's a different separation when it comes to questions about your faith, because deconstruction has become such a like naughty word.
Yeah.
Like, you can't be deconstructing, you can't be doing that. Well, yeah, you shouldn't be deconstructing, you should be reconstructing or reevaluating. But if you just deconstruct and leave it broken, one, you didn't actually put in the work, and two, I'm sorry, but it's become such a negative word. So because it's about your faith.
Well, and here's the problem with deconstruction is we know it's easier to tear something apart than it is to build it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, this was one of the conversations Daniel and I had as we were driving is I actually believe that many Christians are just a few questions away from walking away from Jesus. And that's a scary thought because we've taught them here, these are the right answers. All it takes is a few strategically placed questions by the enemy and them going, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And then they walk away because they've not given a faith that allows them to have questions.
Yeah. Or I think the danger is also, if we're so concrete on this is the answer, this is the answer, as soon as they see something that is contrary to that, well, now all of their foundations have just been ripped out from underneath them.
Well, and this is why I like to call us loosely Lutheran. I'm proud of our Lutheran heritage. Like there's a lot of beautiful things about Lutheranism. We're not trying to make better Lutherans.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you define Lutheran as a follower of Jesus. But a lot of times people are like, no, this is what it means to be Lutheran. Well, but there are things in there that other people disagree with that are reasonable things to have conversation around.
Mm-hmm.
And if my goal is just to make you a Lutheran, then I'm going to give you all the right answers so you can check the Lutheran box. And then you have a very shallow faith because once you get outside of Lutheranism, you're hosed.
Yep.
And that's I think that's the scariest part is when we teach. This is why Christian nationalism is so scary to me, because it's teaching people these are the check marks of what it means to be a Christian in America, and you have to agree with these things, and you not just critical thinking, but I think that all it takes is, it's like Jenga. All it takes is that one strategic brick pulled out and that whole thing falls down.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that a lot of Christians have actually learned how to develop a stable faith that can handle questions, but even that they're okay to question things. Like I had one person said, it might have been a professor or it might have been a pastor. I think it was a pastor. He said, if you're not thinking one heretical thought a day, you're not thinking.
Mm.
And I'm like, that's awesome.
Sure.
Like, why, there's nothing wrong to go, why do I have to believe in Jesus alone? That's a reasonable question. Like, think about that. There are all these religions in the world. And if a Christian's never thought that, one, they may just never thought they could think that. But is there anything wrong with saying, why do we believe, why is Jesus the only way?
So Megan, what are some strategies? I'm sure as you've gone through the sermon writing process, you both have. You guys will come across in your studies for those sermons questions, right? How do you wrestle with those? Not only now as you've maybe been studying it yourself, but now as you have to now go and teach on this. Like, what's your faith question process?
Honestly, the questions and the self-evaluation is easy. It's the then executing it,
sure.
living what you preach
Oh,
is totally different.
Yeah.
right. You can ask the question.
I can ask the question and I can point out what's wrong
yeah,
in my own life. I can confess what's wrong, but then what?
sure.
Am I going to make changes based off of what I just put all the effort or work or told other people to do? Do I do it?
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Which then all of a sudden what we get is a, why not?
Yeah.
That's the deeper
Cool.
question
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I did lunch today with a guy, and he was like, hey, I'm kind of new to this Jesus stuff. And he goes, I appreciate it because you talk in such a way not assuming that everybody is a believer or understands the Bible, even people who are raised in the church or became Christians. And part of our conversation today is he's like, I want to take this more seriously. And he said, I feel like I've got some catching up to do. And I said, well, that's catching up is the wrong way to look at it. It's just taking that first step. And it hit me as we were talking. A leader is just somebody who's at least one step ahead of the person behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not about catching up. It's about taking that step, and you're going to lead somebody else, right? And there are some of us who are further steps along. But if you're playing catch up, now it's a comparison game.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the questioning process. Again, we don't ask questions just to ask questions. We always ask questions. Well, I think we should ask questions with the intention of saying, okay, what does the Bible say about this? Or what is God's heart around this? Or, do we have adequate answers to these things? And then if we don't, is that okay? And like some things in the Bible just do not have adequate answers. I'm the genocidal stuff. Like I have yet to hear a real answer that makes me go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Like I've heard different things of why God told Israel to slaughter the Canaanites or the Amalekites, including the children. And then you're like, well, how does that square up with a loving God? Well, we know that in the ancient world they have blood feuds, and if he didn't wipe out the children, then Jesus's line could have been wiped out. And here's where my head goes. Well, then he's not as strong as we think he is if he needs to wipe out a people group in order to protect Jesus. So then why? I don't know.
And yet
there it is.
Yeah.
And so that's the part where it's like when people come to those, that's what I mean by one good question away. And I think sometimes we're afraid if we don't have the right answers that someone's going to go, well, I can't believe in Jesus. And I wonder if maybe the ability to say, I don't know, but maybe that's why we should wrestle with it. Maybe that's the part that is the invitation to Jesus.
Yeah. And I told you in our conversation when I called you when I was starting this whole study on apologetics that I'm unsatisfied with that oftentimes.
Yeah.
And so now it's how can you, as a Christian who is seeking answers, who is seeking an understanding, who is seeking God's character, knowing in full transparency, you're never going to know all of it, right? How do you sit with that? Because sometimes your questions, the only answer that you can run into is, well, it's the unknowable nature of God. How do you wrestle with that?
So have you heard the cross-stitch analogy or the tapestry analogy?
No, but I like cross-stitching.
I love cross-stitching. I haven't done it in years. I did cross-stitching when I was a kid.
Good for you.
Look at that. Did you do cross-stitching too?
Mm-hmm.
Look at that. High five. We did cross-stitch buddies.
Jaden, what do you do?
Okay, so
my grandma tried to teach me how to sew.
Yeah, I actually, in order to suck up to teachers, that when I was getting bad grades in 5th and 6th grade, I would do cross stitch for them for Christmas. It never got me a better grade.
Oh my goodness.
Ever.
But I got you. Aw.
It did. Isn't that precious, Jason? Yeah. So this is the illustration: is when we see things in the Bible or suffering, when the suffering in the world doesn't make sense, it's like the back of a cross stitch. You're not going to see it until you get to heaven, and that's when you see all the stuff behind. And it hit me. I'm like, no, it's flipped. All the suffering is the confusing part where we don't see the picture, and we're not going to see the picture until we get to the other side, until we're in heaven. And even then, I don't know that we're going to fully understand it then. So you just made a comment. It's not that I think sometimes we're never going to fully understand who God is. That's actually what makes heaven so amazing. We talked about this in the Heaven series. I'm going to spend eternity getting to know an eternal God. That is the joy of eternity, is there's an endlessness to who God is. So even in my human understanding, there are things that I think I understand. I get to spend eternity plumbing those depths and getting to know God and his creation and how creative and amazing he is. But this side of heaven, everything looks messy. And of course, I'm not going to be able to go. That's why I think it's so inadequate to try and give rational explanations that somehow justify things like the killing of innocent people. And instead of going, I don't fully understand. Now, here are some reasons why it could be, and leaving possibility. Like I know one of them is war rhetoric. War rhetoric is a very specific style of writing that we still do today. So it's possible that the writers of, I'm reading Exodus right now where it talks about wiping out an entire people. Or maybe it's 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel it is, 2 Samuel. Talking about wiping out an entire family. And then 2 chapters later, there's the grandson of the family. And it's like, wait a second, you just said they were completely wiped out. And in Exodus, it talks about all the livestock are wiped out. And yet 2 plagues later, there's more livestock to die from hail. And that makes you go, well, why is that?
Well, the text I just read in Deuteronomy on Sunday was referring back to Exodus, but basically saying kill these people when they come, have nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I think we look at that and I think it's okay to wrestle with those things. And I wonder if as Christians, if we can teach people that don't just ask questions to be obstinate or difficult or to go, ha ha, gotcha, you know. And I think atheists or people who've been hurt by the church, they love to ask those questions because they're trying to get you in gotcha moments. Those aren't helpful. But as Christians, I think when we come to texts or questions that we don't understand, I think they're meant to be messy. And maybe we ask the question of like, what if the point of those stories is, don't we all kind of want to do that when we've been wronged? Like that, before I get too hard on Israel, and I think clearly it seems that God did orchestrate those things and use them. And I could say, well, I can't believe in a God who does that, but will believe in a humanity that gladly does it. At least with God, I can kind of go, well, maybe there's something I can't fathom about how that might be possible, or why there might be something accomplished from it that I can't see. When humans do those things, it's just because humans are nasty and we do mean things. So I think those questions are important. All right. So also, when you were doing the parable, okay, so let's talk about the two ways that you talked about approaching it, because I think
Yeah.
that's also brings some great questions as you looked at the parables from two particular ways you could read.
Yeah. So the
parables.
first one was they're both about a man who found something
Yeah.
of great value and then went and sold all that they had because what they found was of greater value. So that interpretation is we are the man in that instance who have found the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, same thing. And we should be willing to give up anything and everything to pursue a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate treasure. A relationship with him far outvalues anything else we could ever want or need or imagine. That was number one. Number two way of looking at it was that God himself is the man who found a treasure, or the merchant looking for the pearl, and that he went and sold everything he had to buy us, who is the treasure. He gave his one and only son as a sacrifice so that he could have us forever.
Yeah. And you didn't just get there because it sounds fun. The rest of the parable is all connected to that. God is always the one initiating things.
Yeah.
Which is where the idea that God is the one and we're the treasure.
And there's several verses throughout the Bible that call us treasure, or we are God's chosen treasure, or he did buy us for a price. And so when you use all those and match it up with that parable, that also makes a lot of sense. So which one is it?
Did you find it uncomfortable, the idea that you might be God's treasure?
No.
Do you think people
My name is Pearl.
That's I know I'm God's treasure, and I'm named after the treasure.
Honestly, it's not something I really struggle with believing. I guess I just
that's good.
Confident in myself, but I do think a lot of people do, and I think a lot of people fail to see how God loves them.
Yeah.
Or I think there's two ways. Some people find it hard to believe that they could be loved that much. Others find it hard to know how God loves them or see how God loves them, because it does look different than we love each other.
Yeah.
So I think this fall will be a good series to wrestle through in a lot of different
We're going to be talking
angles.
about love, learning to be loved. I think in evangelicalism in particularly, we have a bent towards sell everything because, and this is, okay, so within Calvinism, there's something called tulip, and the T is total depravity. And the downside of total depravity, if you don't understand the theology correctly, is that basically as a human being, you're garbage, you're worth nothing. Because you're evil. That's not actually what total depravity teaches, but that's how a lot of people take it is, I'm evil, I do nothing good, I bring nothing good. So the idea that I could be a treasure to God is kind of weird sounding.
It would be. That's sad.
Isn't it? But it's very much an evangelical way of looking at things. So we immediately interpret the text as, well, the treasure is the gospel, which that is. And I think there is both ways to read that text. I think that's the beauty of the story. I think of, go ahead.
My phone's ringing. I'm sorry.
Oh, I think of Toy Story.
It's all good.
Butch, is that the kid's name? The one who makes the mangled up.
I don't know. Sid.
Yeah. That's what it is. Sid.
Sid.
Yeah, thank you.
Sid.
But think about it. He causes all the destruction and brings those things, but he makes these sick, twisted things of broken toys. And I think sometimes we think that's how God is. We think God is, he takes our sick, twisted brokenness and makes something out of us. And we're these deformed spiritual creatures that God just chooses to use. And yet I think more of Andy is actually how God sees us. He loves us. And yeah, every once in a while, like our pull string stops working.
Mhm.
And we do broken things.
I was
Mhm.
about to say, my mind was like, yep. And then when we do those broken things, we play dead. And no, you
Yes.
don't see me, God.
Yeah, but I think again, it's not that we don't have total depravity. Rightfully understood is that we have this line of sin that corrupts everything, but it doesn't mean that we are without good because we're made in the image of God.
Mhm.
But I think in evangelicalism, we're so focused on man's brokenness and evil that the idea of being treasured by God is hard for a lot of people. And I think about even in my own story how that I had to break through that theology a little bit. Um, Last question, and then we'll call it a day. Uh, as you were reading through it, how is there anything that you learned that you didn't expect to learn when you were reading through the parables? Were there new things that you gleaned, or even in how you read the parables? Did you anything new that
Mhm.
stuck out to you that you would encourage people listening?
Two things, but we've already kind of talked about them. One is just that it is okay to ask questions and wrestle through a text that you don't understand right away,
Yeah,
or to ask others, or to get their opinions, or whatever. That's okay. Sometimes I need permission to not know things.
yeah.
I've always felt like I had to be smart or had
Were
to
you
have
a
my stuff
know-it-all as a
together.
little kid?
I was a goody two shoes.
Were you a goody?
And then some.
And then
Yeah. So just like knowing that no, it's okay. I don't have to know. It That's freedom. And then the second thing, really was the things that I give up other things for shows what I
Yeah.
actually value. Um, yeah. And just sitting on that and wrestling with that throughout the day and noticing now
Yeah.
what I'm willing to spend time towards or
Well, that
not.
connects to a sermon series we did, earlier this year on the Like It Matters series.
Mhm.
There's the things we say matters, and then the things our live show matters.
Mhm.
And it's kind of the
100%. Yep.
same thing. Um, well, one, I haven't had a chance to watch the sermon yet. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Part of the reason why I love these conversations and why I wanted to have you on is one, you preached, and though the sermon, the podcast is no longer about the sermon series. We talk about all kinds of different things, but I think this falls in line with a lot of the things we've been talking about, questions
Mhm.
and why questions matter and how to ask better questions. But I really liked. I think it's important that there is that part of us that somehow feels like we're defective or deficient
Mhm.
if we have questions.
Mhm.
Mm.
And I think the questions, I think that's, we're going to have a really hard time with heaven if we're afraid to ask questions.
Mhm.
Well, and that's why I tried to use that analogy of questions are an enrichment process, which
Yeah.
means at the end it makes something better.
Mhm.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I think I'll end with this, and that is if you haven't watched the sermon, watch it online at the park. Um, my hope, even, and not even for our church, but just for me, I was reading through the text that I'm reading this Sunday, and I got hit a little bit because that's the hard part about questions is it's not just what the question says about God, it's what the question is meant to say about me. How does it challenge my perception of God, of faith? And I got hit with something as I was reading through the parable that I'll be sharing this weekend. And here's where it hit me is sometimes the reason why we don't want to ask the question is because we don't actually want the answer.
Mm.
I think sometimes the answer scares us because what if the answer demands something I'm not ready to give,
Mhm.
or it reveals a blind spot or a weakness, and so
Or it pulls that Jenga piece out and everything's gonna crumble.
yeah, and I think those are the parts where I think God's inviting us to go. My grace is bigger than that.
Mm.
My mercy is bigger than that, and I think that's what allows us to ask those questions, even the ones that pull the Jenga piece out,
Mhm.
because it doesn't define us. It doesn't mean God loves us less. Uh, it's funny, whenever you do reviews or if you've ever, I'm always afraid to hear people's feedback about me because, like, if somehow they say it, they didn't know they felt that way until they said it out loud. When the reality is, by asking it, I'm just letting them share with me that they've already are thinking.
Yeah.
And my experience has been that when I invite people to share feedback with me, when I ask that question, it makes me more trustworthy.
Mhm.
Mm. Oh, and God is the same way. he's not uncomfortable by your questions.
That's right.
He is trustworthy because because when you ask those questions, like, you have to be in the right space to receive them, right?
Yeah.
God is
Yeah.
always in the space to receive them.
But isn't that the weirdest, like that weird thing with head game? Like, oh my gosh, if I ask that question, now they're going to think about it. They weren't thinking about it before. No, they already know what annoys you, what annoys them about you.
See, we had to fill out today in school like a questionnaire of like, how are we doing so far? My answer is, I'm so sorry. Please take this the right way. Know that I think you are great. Like, I had like a paragraph before I actually got to my actual feedback because I was so worried of how they would take it, because that's just our culture. Like, if you're not in the right space, you can do a lot of damage to someone.
Yeah.
Well, and we've created this as a staff culture. Like, I've regularly asked you and Derek, how am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be prepared to hear not great.
Criticism is a cuss word nowadays.
Oh my
where
gosh.
before
Yeah.
it just used to be like, I wouldn't. People have to learn how to take criticism. Now there is a difference between bad criticism and good criticism.
Mhm.
Let's get that right, but it's not the same.
Well, which is why when you ask for questions, this goes back to the question, right? If I ask, how am I doing? If all I'm looking for is positive affirmation, what I should say is, I'm really feeling insecure. Can you tell me how I'm doing well? But doesn't that sound needy?
Yeah.
But that's also
But-
the right question, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're presenting the question in the way you need to
But it
receive
feels
something.
so much needy. But then but think about it. If I ask, but I don't share that, and then you say something negative and I get defensive, you're like, why don't you just say you needed some affirmations?
Yeah.
Because we want to bolster ourselves to look bigger and better than we actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I do need to be told, hey, you're doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not something, I'm not somebody who, love language is not praise. That's not one of my strong love languages. Doesn't mean I don't appreciate it.
Mhm.
But there have been times where I'm like, I need to know that I'm not sucking royally
Yeah.
because I feel like I'm failing in everything right now.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I'm afraid to go up and go, hey, Megan, I'm feeling a little insecure. Can you just tell me how I'm doing things right? Because I'm afraid, because how does that make me look?
Yeah.
But could you imagine the healthy culture you're cultivating when you openly communicate your needs like
Mhm.
that?
One, and I'll give I'll shout a little praise to you. You actually had that conversation with me where you were like, I don't feel like I'm doing very well. Am I actually doing my job right?
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciated that because then I was able to go, oh, I didn't realize that you needed that. And that's not a form of weakness. Now, if that's all I do, if all I'm like, please affirm me, that's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm more prone and to say, hey, where do I need to improve? And we've had some I wouldn't say they were tough conversations. I think one conversation we have, you were a little nervous about how I would take it, which made me knew that you were bringing it from a place of love. You weren't excited to
No.
bash me upside the head. You were nervous about that I'd be hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it way safer for me because it was very clear, like, I don't want to hurt you. And I'm like, just say it. But the fact that you cared about that mattered. And I think that goes aligned with the questions in general. Like, how do we foster a culture where a seasoned Christian should know the answer, has the ability to go, I thought I knew the answer to that, or I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we feel safe asking questions, and how do we be a safe person to have questions asked of?
And a safe place.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, you look like you were going to say something.
I just always think being willing to hear an answer that you might not agree with, or you don't have to jump on and be the right person
Mhm.
Yeah.
who's in the know, but just willing to hear their stance or their take, and then have a conversation about it,
Yeah.
not an argument.
Yes.
And not feel the need, like, I've had people who've said things that are clearly not right from a biblical perspective. And younger, more immature Jason, like last year, would have jumped on that and been like, let me tell you why your theology is wrong. And what the Lord has done is now I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Say more.
How'd
Like,
you get to that?
How'd you get to that?
Yeah.
Instead of feeling the need to correct them because their soul's in immortal danger, but usually and it comes from a good place. I want people to have right understanding. And now I sit back and I go, okay, I don't know that I need to attack why that's wrong right now, but it's also, is it my job to change their mind? Or is it my job to listen, allow the Holy Spirit to speak? And yet I was just reading Titus this morning, and it was talking about that we teach sound doctrine and that we don't allow people to sit in bad theology, essentially. As a pastor, I have a different responsibility
Mhm.
because when bad theology comes into the church, I have a responsibility to protect healthy biblical theology and a healthy humility to acknowledge some theologies are okay to disagree with. But sound doctrine, no, this is what it means to be Christian.
Mm.
But if somebody comes in that's exploring faith and it's like, yeah, I don't think Jesus is the, as a matter of fact, that was the conversation I had with somebody. They're like, I'll be honest, this word for word what they said. I think Bible interpretation is up to whoever's reading it. And I wanted to go, that's nice. I'm glad you feel that way. But I realized I'm like, this isn't the time or place. Instead, this person needs to be discipled. And they do love Jesus. They just don't understand the Bible yet. So I think the Bible is kind of open. Younger Jason would have felt the need to correct instead of asking more questions and then walking beside them, because there are right answers. Like, we're not just asking questions for question's sake. We're asking because there are right answers. And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. Or the answer is there's many different.
Agree to disagree.
Yeah, and until it becomes a doctrinal thing, and
Right.
at that point, then I want to say, then we're probably not talking on the same field, right? If I'm talking with a Mormon, for instance,
Yep.
it's not just agree to disagree. No, our disagreement actually separates us in our doctrines, and those things matter. So this has been a great conversation. Thanks for being on. Just so you know, Megan loves being on the podcast. It's actually her favorite thing in the world. That light is blinking. Is that a problem?
Oh, it's just what's telling us. It's
You've talked too much.
no, it's when you're on the camera. It's the
Oh.
switcher. It's the cool things.
Oh, that's cool. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So now it's Megan, and now her light's on,
that makes way more
and
sense.
now it's me, and now my light's on, and they didn't need any of this.
Okay. Well, no, I was nervous because the last time we did that, we
Squirrel.
recorded a whole episode. No, let me tell you why this mattered. We did an entire episode, and I said, "Hey, Jaden, the light wasn't on." He goes, "Are you kidding me?" That means we didn't record any of that. So I was like, "Did we just not record stuff?" So that's why I was asking the question.
Nah, see, I'm the mastermind with all the tools over here.
You are so witty. I know, actually. I really enjoy having you on the podcast. I know she's like, I'll be honest.
This one was better. I like knew what we were going to talk about because
To
I
some
wrote
degree.
it.
Yeah, you did.
I
Yeah.
did the research
Yeah.
this time.
You're pretty prepared on that one.
Yeah.
That's good.
Usually I'm like, duh.
Well, do you remember?
Don't ask me a question.
The original Breakthrough Breakdown? There were 4 of us, and usually it was me and this other person would talk a lot, and then you would talk, and you'd be like, I don't have anything any good contribution. I'm like, are you kidding? You said the only tangible smart thing out of the entire podcast came out of your mouth. So it was great to have you,
Thank you.
and I look
Good
forward
for
to
you.
having you back again, probably the next time you preach. Or
Sounds good. See you in a month.
yeah, you're going to be back on in a month. I'm super excited for that. And Jaden, what'd you think of the new?
It's a learning curve, but we're gonna get after it. It's gonna get better. I promise.
That's going to be awesome.